Joined now by Ricardo Baca, the editor of the Cannabist, who it is your last day today at the Cannabist.
Today is the last day.
You're moving on to different things. We'll talk about that in just a bit. You were the first mainstream journalist covering marijuana in the country. Take me through that experience. What's it like when you tell somebody what your job is?
You know, the early days, it went as you'd expect it to go. There were a lot of punchlines and jokes. People didn't understand it at first. I think because pot has been such a natural joke over the years as a result of federal prohibition and a truly devastating war on drugs. And so when we made the decision and the call at the Post saying, hey, we're going to cover this, we're going to cover it seriously from a journalistic perspective, and we're going to dedicate an entire website and staff a bunch of resources to cover this beat, including the serious and the not so serious. I think people didn't quite know what to think about it, and they were curious and they were unsure and they were worried. You know, and you think about it, 3 years ago, it was a very different era for legal marijuana. We didn't really know what was laying ahead of us, and now we have a lot of experience in this space.
What was the point where that shifted and became less of a joke and more of a serious topic?
I think about 6 months into 2014, you know, Colorado had at least those 6 months of sales to show and say, this is happening, you know, these taxes are coming in. Also, right about that time in mid-2014, you had Washington State implementing its own sales. And so suddenly you had 2 U.S. states legally selling marijuana to anybody with an ID showing that they're 21 or over. And I think that's kind of when it started to change. And then, of course, the next year we had the midterm elections, and we saw the addition of Alaska and Oregon and D.C. to the mix. And forget about it. This year we had 8 more states go legal, either recreationally or medically.
3 years on the beat. What was your favorite story you covered through the course of that time? It's a tough question for a journalist, I know.
Wow. You know, I think going back to 2014, I ended up writing a piece about the potency of edibles and how it wasn't representative in the product, what it said so on the package. And what I loved about that story is it really showed how if you take part in the beat that you cover, I consume cannabis, and I did then too, and I had bought a package of edibles. I had consumed my regular amount at that time, which was about 2.5 milligrams of activated THC, and it did nothing to me, and I had these edibles kind of in a drawer, and just I knew I would be writing about them someday when a owner of a pot shop called and said she'd had 400 returns of the same product, and it turns out it was the same manufacturer that I had tried personally and knew that there was not the amount of potency in there that was supposed to be in there. I just knew that we were on to something. It ended up being a big Sunday page 1 expose, just showing how irresponsible and flagrant the industry was being at that time, and also how much of a need there was for lab testing, for potency, and for all of the other elements, you know, documenting cannabis right now in this legal regulated era. So I think that was good. It got us off to a good start. It really encouraged journalists in other markets to test for potency, to test for pesticides, to test for residual contaminants. This is a new market. It's very brash. It's coming up from the black market, and it needs to be covered with watchdogs who care and are looking out for their consumers.
You consume yourself. Do you think another journalist could cover the beat without consuming marijuana?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's not necessary. You know, our pot critics that we have, they definitely need to consume. Our concentrates expert definitely needs to consume. But if you want to be a weed editor, the Denver Post is hiring a new cannabis editor to take my place. You don't need to consume. You know, it's not about that. But if you do consume, just as I said, it does have the opportunity to open up doors to stories because you yourself are putting yourself in the same position as your readers, who are the customers and the consumers in this market.
Talking about other journalists covering pot, you've had the benefit of being in front of this for a long time. What do you think the mainstream media does not do well when we cover marijuana?
Well, we could get back to the jokes, you know, the jokes that I started off with. The jokes are old, the puns are definitely old, especially to the discerning users of this substance, the people who prefer cannabis to alcohol or use both. But another thing that I think we could do is just really wipe the slate clean. We were victims of decades of misinformation that started at the very top. I'm not big on conspiracy theories, but I was incredibly surprised to learn a couple of years ago that the Nixon administration was a very big part of making up the war on drugs and assigning dangers to marijuana that have frankly never been there. And then we grew up with this. We were taught by our mentors and teachers and parents and presidents about the dangers. And now I think we live in an era where we need to wipe that clean and just open our mind up to what the science is saying. And yes, there are dangers, but there aren't nearly the dangers that we once thought there were. And frankly, this is, in every sense that we understand, a safer substance than alcohol.
We've seen the industry evolve quite a bit, especially here in Colorado. Now that we're seeing more and more states legalize this, where does the industry here in Colorado go in your mind?
The industry in Colorado has been a leader, and they've done a very good job. There have been a couple bad actors, some bad characters, and they've given a bad name to many of the other people in this space. But for the most part, they've been really respected, and that's why we have become this natural mentor for the rest of the industry worldwide. People from Europe and Puerto Rico and South America are coming to Colorado to talk to the regulators and the businesses to see how we did it, to see what worked, to see what didn't, and then take that to create their own systems. So I see that trajectory continuing. I really do see that responsible business, business practices moving forward, and this industry evolving into a truly mainstream industry that's not unlike aerospace or oil and gas.
You are leaving the Post after 15 years. How hard is it going to be for you to step out of the newsroom?
Oh, then see, the newsroom is the hardest part. And this is a journalist. One of the greatest honors of being a journalist is that newsroom environment where you work with such intelligent, compassionate, really amazing people. I don't think there's any other workplace on earth that's as bright or compelling as a newsroom. And so I think that really is going to be the hardest part, is leaving my colleagues and not seeing them on a weekly basis. That said, I have some opportunities ahead of me, and that's what kind of propelled this move from the Post after 15 years and leaving the Cannabist really at the top of its game. In November, we just got the ComScore numbers. We had more than 1.2 million unique visitors. We blew away High Times and marijuana.com. Really proud of what we did, but for me it's just time to move along, and I'm very much going to miss that newspaper environment and my colleagues in the newsroom.
Want to give us a hint of what you're up to next?
I can say that it's a technology startup, and we're operating in stealth mode right now, and I'm just thrilled at the opportunity to kind of develop other skills outside of journalism. I turn 40 in about 2 months. And I think it's time for me to know how to do something other than journalism, especially given the difficult climate that a lot of us face with some of the corporate ownership going on.
Ricardo Baca, 3 years at the Cannabist, 15 years at the Post. Thank you so much for exploring uncharted territory for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Great.